with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, coronavirus. I remember it wasn't that long ago that we talked about it on the show, and it was kind of out there in Wuhan, and, nobody was really quite zeroed in on it. There was, obviously for China, it was a really, really big deal. And for American supply chains, it became a very big deal. But it was kind of something that was happening on the other side of the world. But that's no longer the case. My goodness, it's come to America. And if I see some of these projections out there of how many people could potentially get it and how many people could potentially die from it, it's absolutely staggering. And all of the events and everything now that's been canceled, in every moment it seems like there's just another huge disruption somewhere in America because of this coronavirus.
Well, I think the problem, there are a lot of problems with this that I listen to, and I listen to the pundits talk, and I listen to the politicalization of this whole scenario. Bernie Sanders just this day came out and said that the deaths in this coronavirus could rival that of World War II. Really?
Amazing.
Really? I mean, Bernie
amazing.
Sanders, of course, he knows everything about it, living in Vermont. He gets it, But he does wear Birkenstocks, so I think that makes give him an edge. Maybe it gives him an edge.
No, I mean, it's scary. We all know that. And,
but you don't have to scare people. That doesn't work.
But we're going to talk more about that and what is going to be the disruption to the economy. I mean, it's hard to know right now. I mean, yes, a lot of sports events have been canceled, but, is this going to be something that is going to just kind of ripple right through the economy and everybody's staying at home and nobody's in restaurants and nobody's going out and nobody's doing anything? I was out in Colorado just recently on a ski trip, and I got to tell you, Denver Airport was as busy as I've ever seen it. As busy as and this is just a couple of days ago. Out in the Central Rockies, the ski resorts were absolutely jammed. The spring breakers were arriving in droves. And, a lot of people are just getting on with their lives. I guess it depends where you live.
Well, I think it's probably a good idea to just get on with your life and do what you have to do. And, use some, logical, sensical ideas to keep yourself and your family healthy and I've never seen so many people wash hands. I mean, I'll tell you something else. No one's touching anybody. I gave a speech last Friday down in Miami to about 600 and some odd people for International Women's Day Awards. And I was watching everyone greet everyone, and it looked like everybody was dancing the Macarena. I've never seen anything like it. Nobody was shaking hands. They were bumping hands. They were bumping hips.
It's elbow bumps now.
Elbow bumping. They were toe bumping. I've never seen anything like that in my life. But, I mean, you have to be logical. You should take care of yourself. And if you don't want to go to large groups, that's fine. But I don't think you have to clear out every toilet paper roll that exists in every Costco in the United States. I don't think that's going to really do it. Just saying.
Well, we're going to be back to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
We're very pleased to have on our show as our first guest, Varela Nevaer. He's the director of Hispanic Economics. He is one of the leading authorities on Hispanics and Latinos in our country. Louis, welcome to Made in America.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, just to stay on the coronavirus thing, I had read something, and this is, isn't this an irony that Mexico is considering to close the border with the United States because of coronavirus?
Unintended consequences of a virus.
What isn't that a turn of the tables?
And the Democrats will vote against that.
I'm not sure exactly what the policy will be for Mexico in terms of the virus, simply because the president, who's in office there right now, AMLO, that's his nickname for López Obrador, is really, really not on top of things. And he really has been getting a lot of pressure for not being aware of what's going on with the virus and proper health conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you look at the map, I mean, Latin America right now hasn't been one of the sort of hotspots in the world for coronavirus. So, I don't know why that is.
Well, I do. I think I have some insight in that. I've been listening to a number of the doctors talking on TV. They think, and they're pretty comfortable with this, there's a seasonality to this virus. That is,
when it's warm,
it goes, and humid, it dies away, and then it comes back in cooler weather. So this may make it here up in the North American area through the beginning of the summer, and then we may lose it, and then it'll come back again, sort of like flu season comes back October, November every year.
So Louis, back on the political front, and Hispanics, Latinos in the United States, they're accumulating a lot of power. Their voices are being heard. Politically, it is a very, very important block of our country. And how do you see the Hispanic community coming together in this upcoming election? And it seems like they're still very solidly for the Democrats. Do you see any break in that? Do you see any break in Hispanic voting bloc here in the United States that might move to the Republicans?
Well, actually, the whole Latino Hispanic vote in this country has become polarized, especially over the past two presidential cycles. And that is that there has been such an emphasis by the mainstream media to talk about immigrants, the asylum seekers on the border, the kids in cages, the roundups of the undocumented employees in the U.S. for deportation, that what we forget is that in this country, 2/3 of all Hispanics were born in the U.S. 2/3 are natural-born American citizens. And their interests align much more with mainstream Americans than they do with immigrant populations. The reasons why in the mainstream media you have this distorted view where you only talk about one segment of the population, Hispanics who are coming to this country as immigrants or are here illegally, is because the reporters that we see on the TV and in the news and on cable are actually immigrants themselves. You have Maria Hinojosa on NPR, you have Jorge Ramos on Univision, you have Lulu Garcia Navarro on NPR as well, and you have Ana Navarro on CNN and View and all these programs. They're all wonderful people, but they were all born in different countries and they came to the U.S. So that's the only story that they have. At the same time, there's a complete absence of native-born Hispanics talking about Latinos. So what you have is, if you look back at 2016, 30% of all Hispanics voted for Donald Trump. This time around, a larger percentage are going to support his reelection. And when you see all the news talking about the Latino surge, they're talking about Democratic Latinos in the Democratic primaries. So where you have Bernie Sanders getting vast amounts of support from that segment, and then Joe Biden trying to get some of it, that's fine, that's good, but that's all within the Democratic Party. And when you see the national, all the globalized Hispanic vote, you find that 1/3 of all Hispanics voted for Donald Trump last time around, and probably 35 to 40% will vote for his reelection this time around.
And why is that? And why is that? Why is Donald Trump going to get more of that vote? What has he done?
Well, it's not what he has done, but it's what he represents, and that is he represents policies that defend native-born people, natural-born Americans. And what is happening is because there's so much of an emphasis on the immigrants, the asylum seekers, the problems at the border, that natural-born Hispanics in this country are fed up. And it's almost like a protest vote. They're simply saying, we're tired of Jorge Ramos. We're tired of, Maria Hinojosa. We're tired of the mainstream media just focusing on the border, because basically natural-born Hispanics are saying, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not an immigrant. I don't really care about immigration anymore. I'm tired of all these kids. I'm tired of all these kids in cage stories. I'm tired of all the asylum seekers. Where are the stories about me and my life as an American? And that's exactly what's really riveting, because you see a huge schism growing within the Hispanic community and within the Hispanic vote. And this is very consistent with what's happened before. If you go back, say, a generation ago, when the only thing you saw in the news was Italian Americans and mafia and Italian Americans, the perception was that every Italian American was somehow associated with the mafia. And Italian Americans were so fed up with that they really struggled to prove that they were Americans first, and they had nothing to do with the illegal activities of a small minority of people in the mafia. Same thing is happening now.
Well, you know what? I think that's a very, very valid point that you're raising right now. In Miami, particularly, I think what you're saying resonates incredibly well. Miami is a different marketplace than the Hispanic or Latino that you find out in Los Angeles, for example. Totally different psychology. And the people that are here, we have folks such as yourself who were born here. They're native-born Americans, whole different ballgame. Then we have the folks that legally came here from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Salvador, Brazil, with just the entire Central South American environment, Colombia, a very, very big group. And but they're naturalized citizens. They've embraced the concept of Americanism and our democracy, and they want that American dream. They are not, by any stretch of the imagination, supporters of the Sanders. They don't support the idea, and they don't want to support and think about the illegal scenarios because they came through the program the way they should have, and they've done everything right. And by the way, they're enjoying a great life for themselves, not every day, but most days are wonderful, and they have a shot of, the American dream, which is what we're all about.
And Louis, many of them have come to escape socialism.
Exactly.
And that's what the Democrats are talking about right now.
Yeah.
They ran away from that.
No, it's true. The thing is that there's, as you described it, it's not a monolithic voting bloc. And if you go down and look at the different components of it, you find that especially now, despite what you may be seeing about the polls in California or the election results in Nevada for the primaries or what's going to happen next week in Arizona, you find that there's a growing consensus that there has to be some sort of law and order, and that people who do things legally have to be rewarded. We had a huge survey over a 6-week period to find out, and you find out that there's a tremendous amount of support among natural or native-born Hispanics for building the wall, for deporting people who are here illegally, for not granting asylums and doing repatriation to their native countries, for all the stuff that's on the agenda that you would never even think about that any Hispanic would be supportive of if you just listen to the news. Because on the news, it's always another sob story about some asylum seeker. It's always about kids being separated at the border. It's always about the breadwinner being rounded up at a factory and being deported because he's here illegally.
Hey, Louis, we're going to need to break right there real quick. I mean, these are really good points. I want to get right back to it. Stay with us. We're with Louis Nevaer. He's one of the leading authorities for Hispanics and Latinos in the United States. He is the director of Hispanic Economics. Stay with us. Still much more to talk.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, and we are together with Louis Nevaer, a leading authority on Hispanics and Latinos in the United States, and he is the director of Hispanic Economics. So, Louis, as we were talking, many of the people who have immigrated here to our country, the Latinos that have come to our country have come because they want a country with the rule of law, right? I mean, they're here because of our laws and being protected by our laws and being protected by our due process. And so I guess it would make sense that if there's lawlessness, that's what they have escaped from. That's why they're here. So, and then you got the Democrat Party who's basically promoting lawlessness. It just doesn't seem like the Latino community would embrace that.
Well, I think part of the problem is also, for example, going back to the Miami example, there are processes and there are precedents for everything that's happening. Now, when Obama was president, he took a very sympathetic view of the kids who were brought here illegally by their parents. They're called DACA, right? Deferred Action on Child Arrivals. So these are just kids who, they didn't break any law because they were just minors when they were brought in when they were 4, 5, 6, 7. And they were given protection under DACA. But that's just a temporary thing. So the idea is, okay, what do you do when you have people here who you may want to become citizens or you want to give them a right to claim to have citizens or legal residency, but were brought here illegally? Well, in the 60s, they passed the Cuban Adjustment Act, and there were many Cubans who arrived to the U.S. illegally. But under the Cuban Adjustment Act, they had a claim to stay here for political asylum. So if you have a group of people that you want, what you have to do is do it now, what you did back then. And that is, okay, there's a process. There's the application. Just get a birth certificate, leave the country, come back in legally, and you're in. And so I know, for example, Cubans who arrive in Miami from other points in Latin America after they fled Cuba, they could claim residency and political asylum, but what they had to do was file their entire process at the Freedom Tower in downtown Miami. Then they would hop on a ship, go to the Bahamas, turn around and come back the same day. But when they entered the U.S., they had all the paperwork in place, and they could enter legally. There are laws. So for these DACA kids are in limbo, and they're in limbo just because Congress refuses to do what they did back then. Each of these kids has a birth certificate somewhere, Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, because they were born outside the U.S. Their parents can get copies of the birth certificates, they can fill out the applications, they can go to some border, cross, and then come back and do it legally. So that's what's really frustrating, because by having kids, or this huge population that's about 700,000 people in limbo, and then not having any political program for regularizing them, you basically are a scofflaw. We are basically not a nation of laws because we have, on purpose, people who are in limbo, and that's crazy.
Well, let me ask you this. Now that we're discussing, and there is such a dichotomy of Hispanics that's out there in the media right now, as it relates to, USMCA, sort of like the flight of the phoenix coming out of the demise of NAFTA, so to speak. How do you see that playing out and affecting the U.S. Hispanic market? And I remember having this conversation with a good friend of mine who was the publisher of Hispanic Business out in Santa Barbara, California. He's been covering this for many, many years, Sosa, for many, many years. So I'm interested to get your view on that, because, we're looking forward to having that kicking in, and we think that's going to do great things for both Mexico and Canada, and, of course, the Hispanics in the United States, who are very much involved in some of the organizations and manufacturers and agriculture business that may benefit from this.
Now, I think there's tremendous potential if it's done correctly. And I think what's going on with this epidemic going around the world now, it just shows you how important it is to be integral and to be continental. So if all those companies that have facilities in China and other places in the Far East realize that now the delivery chains have been interrupted by this pandemic, have facilities in Mexico or in Canada, it would be much easier to control business. Imagine, right now we're struggling to close the borders to all these countries just because of the pandemic, whereas if we were just continental, U.S., Canada, and Mexico, it would be so much easier to control. The other problem is that the benefits of the new trade deal are going to be not really realized until we deal with the inability of the Mexican administration right now to deal with the serious issues. They have to deal with the cartels. They have to deal with the lawlessness that they have there. They have to deal with basically the stagnation in the reforms in the judicial system. So if you don't have law and order down there, you really can't operate a business if it's not protected and you don't have legal recourses to adjudicate any dispute or any problem. That's the big issue I see right now. That is that this current administration, AMLO, is not up to the requirements of successfully implementing the new trade deal.
Hey, Louis, we really appreciate you being on the show. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but really an incredible discussion.
This is an important conversation.
Very, very important. We got to check in with you as the as this election cycle unfolds, because the Latino community in the United States is going to play a huge, huge role, and it's always great to hear someone like you explain what's going on. Louis Nevaer.
Thank you for having me on. And also, just don't be surprised if 35 to 40% of Hispanics in this country vote for Trump's reelection.
And that would be massive. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's probably game over if that does happen. Louis Nevaer, he's the director of Hispanic Economics. Coming up, we have John Tamny, who is the director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, and he's also the editor of RealClearMarkets. A very, very important guy. He's got a lot to talk about. You don't want to miss it. We're going to talk about the economic impact of coronavirus.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, we're going to talk about right now something incredibly important. It's very much on the top of my mind as an entrepreneur, as a manufacturer here in the United States. What is the economic impact of coronavirus? And we're hearing, like, as we're here doing the show, I'm seeing school districts all around the United States right now closing down. And, wow, what does that mean to our economy? So many parents are working, the kids go to school, they go to work. And now, if the kids aren't going to school, what sort of provisions can be made? What's that going to do to our economy? I mean, it's just, every moment it seems to be changing. We're very pleased to have joining us now John Tamny, who's the director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks. He is also the editor of RealClearMarkets. John, welcome to Made in America.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
So, the economic impact of coronavirus, and President Trump's talking about stimulus, and we're gonna lower interest rates. We're not gonna collect taxes. We're gonna pump money into the small business community. I mean, that all sounds pretty good, but what do you say?
I don't understand why Republicans, who always make the correct case for free markets during calm times, suddenly think during crisis-laden times that that's when government should act and insert itself into what we do quite a bit more. I'm of the view that central planning by definition fails because politicians are information deficient. When they act, and they always do during what they deem crisis, they actually create the crisis because they insert their information deficiencies and substitute them for actual market forces. And so I think it's unfortunate. What I wanted Trump to say was precisely because these are uncertain times, we think free people being matched with capital are the best way to solve this. Why would we why do people think government is necessary right now?
Well, I think he has to do that. My personal feeling. People are looking for the leader to make a decision and assure that the big picture, in terms of looking out for the whole country, is actually being addressed. So I think that has to happen, even from the perspective of optics. It has to happen. People are looking to somebody to take control of this. Now, having said that, I don't like the idea, and I was listening to what Pelosi was putting out earlier today and yesterday, that the funding should go to SNAP programs and federal programs and other areas that abortion programs in the United States. I don't know how that relates to coronavirus, but I don't think that's I think that's a very bad idea. I mean, that's growing the federal environment, and I don't think it's a good idea. And I agree with you. That's a huge mistake. I would like to see more of a federalist approach to the whole thing, and the funds would go to the states. The states would then decide how best to use funding that they would get from the federal government, because you're 100% correct. Central planning, as we all know, just study the 30s in the USSR, doesn't work. It has a history of not working. I agree with you on that.
I get you, but again, what you're saying is that the government should take billions, tens of billions out of private hands and parcel it out to states. Why is it that our solution is always to empower politicians at a time when, if this really is a threat, when you feel under threat, do you go to government? When you feel like you really need something, do you go to government? Yet we're doing this again, and when are we going to learn? We tried this in the 1930s. A minor recession was turned into something worse by government. We saw this in 2001 and 2002. Enron and WorldCom fail. Markets were unfazed. Then George W. Bush signs into law Sarbanes-Oxley, an anti-corporate crime act, and it scared the daylights out of markets. 2008, most of those loans that banks made at the time ultimately performed. Yet Republicans, once again, afraid of their own shadow, insert themselves and create a crisis. When are they going to learn that markets were pricing coronavirus for weeks, and then government gets involved and creates something much worse? At some point, we've got to realize that if government's not the solution during happy times, it's certainly not the solution during perilous times.
I mean, it makes good sense. I mean, but if we did leave the market to itself, would we potentially see the Dow at 15,000? Because like the markets has been, like, one day it's down a couple of thousand, now it's up 1,000, and at least it seems to have stabilized within this sort of band. If this is the new normal, I don't know. Who knows? Tomorrow's it brings something very different. It's very capricious. It's very different. Yeah. But if they didn't do anything, would have we seen the market just go into a free fall?
Well, I don't know. When Trump was saying nothing, coronavirus has been in the news for weeks and weeks and weeks. When Trump was saying nothing, stocks were at all-time highs, and so I reject the supposition. Well, I think we always, and Republicans, you'd think that they would be the party most attuned to this, given their rhetoric about limited government. Well, here's the opportunity to say, we don't go to government for any of these other things. No one. Well, I mean, Republicans, how long have they been knocking the VA and government provision of health care here? But oh wait, there's a crisis. So let's have a government plan for it. I don't get it, and you'd think that Republicans would have learned by now that every time they intervene, they make things worse, and that's not because they're Republicans, but because politicians lack the information to do what's necessary.
I listened to what you just said, and the market responded when the president spoke. Because, number one, it's going to do that anyway, and it's very finicky. Two, the media also picks up, and I'm sure you're following this, and you're seeing the outtakes from speeches being used throughout the media, both left and right. So that creates a scenario for everyone. But seriously, when the head of the WHO made a comment last week and used the word pandemic, and I was looking at that, and I told somebody sitting next to me, you watch, within about 35 minutes, we're going to be down 1,200 points. At the time she said that comment, the market was down 21 points. So it's not just the president. It's others who were discussing it completely, including the head of the CDC, who makes comments as well. I just don't buy into the fact just because this president makes a comment. The president is expected to make the comment because his population elected him to be the leader of the country. It's just a fait accompli.
John, hold that thought, because we're going to have to take a quick break, but I want you to jump in here.
No, this is good. I encourage this.
I want you to jump in. John Tamny, Director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks and also editor at RealClearMarkets. We're going to be right back. We still got a lot more to talk about. Stick with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with John Tamny, Director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks and also editor at RealClearMarkets. So, John, you're going to jump in. What do you got to say?
Well, yeah, and Rich is correct when he says the president is expected to say something, but I will respond with two things. For one, part of the appeal of Trump is he's different from the average president. For two, Republicans constantly talk about constitutional limited government. There is nothing in the Constitution about viruses. There's not, and if you throw the general welfare clause at me, that's an incorrect read of it. The whole point of president in the federal government is to protect our rights, to basically to protect our freedom. At which point, if Trump had said, hey, look, this has the potential to be dangerous. My sense is it's overstated, but free people do all sorts of amazing things to improve our lives. We'll leave it up to cities and states to do it here. That would have been an interesting thing. And my sense is that there wouldn't have been the negative reaction that there was. And I'll just add to Rich on this. Yeah, CDC, these different entities commenting on it. Why do Republicans always think the government matters most when they claim we're in the greatest peril? Oh, no. That's when, if you really believe in limited government, if you believe you want an effective outcome, this is when you should most be keeping the government out of the way.
Well, I guess I don't totally disagree with what you're saying. I don't quite see it as the federal government doing what you're defining. But I will say that the Democrats have had a very governmental-oriented policy that didn't incorporate the private sector. And I do find it interesting that the president has put together a group and has had meetings this week, sort of like putting together a P3, private-public partnership, to create what needs to be done, such as meeting with the insurance companies and getting them to understand and agree that the deductibles will not be paid, no copay for any of the testing that needs to occur as a result of coronavirus. Working with banks and CEOs of banks in asking them to understand, because a lot of them are looking very good on their balance sheets. So let's make sure we're in good shape and we can help the small to medium-sized businesses, because the large businesses can take care of themselves. But the small to medium, the SMEs are going to need a lot of help. So I think he has, in a way, brought in the private sector.
Well, but I thought, are we Republicans or are we not? Because what you're describing is the government stepping in and basically trying to dictate an outcome that markets wouldn't otherwise dictate. Last I heard, that is central planning. Last I heard, that does not work. Again, what am I missing here? Why is it that Republicans, every time they sense crisis, ascribe a role for the federal government to control outcomes and create outcomes that the markets wouldn't dictate? I am utterly confused, and I think it's time our side looks in the mirror and says, every time we do this, we create a much bigger problem than the one that previously existed.
So, John, my comment would be, over the last 3 years, entrepreneurialism in the country has really done well. There's been a lot of startups, a lot of companies, this go-go economy, people investing and, taking the family's money, whatever they have, taking mortgages, second mortgages, going to their aunts and uncles where they could raise money and, investing it in their vision, their dreams to build their business, their companies. And we've seen so many entrepreneurial startups, and it's really been driving this huge job market that has been very, very favorable for every demographic in our country. And I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I would like to know from you, what do we do in a crisis like this? And, as you know, a startup company, these entrepreneurial companies, they don't have a lot of cash flow. And, when people start holding on to money and they're not paying, in their normal cycles, it puts a lot of stress on them. Can they hold on? And banks, are sometimes they could be very vicious and they can step in and they can do some terrible things. So what do we do? Do we do, I'm just asking, do we just let the chips fall where they may?
Well, but you ask an essential question. Okay. You're talking about entrepreneurialism. Well, as you well know, entrepreneurs do not exist without savings and investment. And so that's why, in a sense, quote, recessions are self-correcting. What do people do during downturns? They become more prudent. Is individual prudence, thrift, good for the individual's economy? Yes, well, all economy is a collection of individuals. And so what's good for the individual is good for the economy. People spend less, they save more. What do entrepreneurs always have to compete with? They have to compete for precious capital with people who want to consume. And so if this is the answer, if entrepreneurialism is the answer, Why then is the federal government talking about all sorts of ways to consume enormous amounts of capital, essentially blunting the impact of Americans across the country and people around the world, for that matter, tightening their belts? The belt tightening is the path toward greater capital formation for entrepreneurs, yet the federal government, in its infinite wisdom, is always trying to step on this essential development.
Hey, John, great points. We really
very good debate.
Very good.
Enjoyed this.
We really love to have you on the show, and hope that you're going to come back and join us. And by the way, we all love Real Clear Markets, Real Clear Politics. What an incredible organization! Great stuff. You publish a lot of wonderful pieces. John Tamny, who's the director for the Center of Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, and also editor at RealClearMarkets. John, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Have a great weekend.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, let's check in with the Democrat primary. And, it's Bernie and Biden. It might just be Biden here pretty soon.
So it's effectively B2B.
Okay.
Just I had to say it. Sorry. Yeah. It's Bernie versus Biden. And we all thought Bernie was going to go down. We actually thought 2 weeks ago Biden was going to go down. And then, isn't it amazing? Miraculously, hello, Democratic Party. Miraculously, Biden comes back. Everyone's coalescing around Biden. He's the savior to everybody on the planet. All sorts of people are endorsing him. Rumors are spreading that Hillary Clinton could be, the number 2 on the spot. Could be the woman who was running for governor in Georgia could be number 2 on the spot. Beto ORourke is going to be the official gun czar for this guy. He puts out an idea that he's going to have, carry the climate czar on his thing. I mean, it's unbelievable. Bernie, in the meantime, everyone thought he was going to drop out because he was losing. He's certainly going to lose Florida. It ain't going to work well for him in Florida. Nobody who ever swam across the Florida Straits would vote for Bernie Sanders because they actually swam in shark-infested waters to get away from Castro. The Venezuelans would be the same thing. They got out from Chavez. They got rid of Maduro. And all throughout, Salvador Central. And there's a big Nicaraguan group down here in Florida, too. So my take is Biden's going to be the guy. Biden's going to be the guy. A communist socialist is not going to win. It's just not going to play well anywhere in the United States, except where the Birkenstocks are sold.
But Biden is going to have to embrace, that ideology. Because he has to unite the party.
No. He has been moving to the left.
Oh, big time.
I mean, come on. Wait a minute. First of all, he said, I don't embrace, Medicare for all, Medicaid for all the way Bernie wants to do it because we can't afford 38 trillion, 22. Depending, the number changes every other day, sort of like the stock market. He says, so we're going to have an option, a public sector option, which really is the back door leading to public, health care, which is exactly what Bernie wanted. So Biden will give the imprimatur that he is actually, some more moderate, but in reality, he isn't. And I got to tell you something else that really concerns me. Over the next few months, things are going to be coming out about Hunter Biden and the whole Biden family. Just watch that. That's on the horizon right now. But yes, right now, Democrats, I think it's going to be Biden. I think Bernie's going to, eliminate what he's doing. He's going to resign. And then everyone's going to say, kumbaya, let's go with Biden.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how his followers, though, react to that. But
it depends on who he picks for his running mate. That's the person who could wind up being president. Who knows?
Well, I think what you got to do
could be Kamala Harris.
I think what you got to do is that, when Biden picks his running mate, you have to look at that person as the president.
It's exactly correct. First of all, they better make sure they put a little, when you go to Beijing, they give you a card from the Hyatt. In case you get lost, you give it to somebody. They're going to have to put that with Biden. Give them a card and said, I'm lost. Please get me back to the White House. I mean, I look at the guy and I'm really worried. I got to tell you that. He's not all there. I mean, can I ask you a question, Neil? We watch these, town hall meetings that he has where he tells, all these people to go to H. Don't vote for me. You're just disgusting. You're crap. I've never heard a politician trying to encourage votes by telling off the potential voters to, go to heck. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Let's have
what's wrong with that
push-up contest.
Yeah, let's
arm wrestle.
Hey man. I don't think that's not going to work when he starts debating against Trump. It's not going to work. I'm just saying.
So yeah, it's going to be very fascinating, and what's going to happen with coronavirus, and how's that going to impact the election? Let me tell you, if this thing is going on, during the summer, and we're getting into election season, people are going to be so overwhelmed, they're going to be so burnt out. It's going to be like, let's just change, let's just do something different. So it could almost be as if they're voting, to get rid of coronavirus. A scary thought. And at the other side is that, if there's no more rallies and Biden is kind of locked up in a room somewhere, he's not saying all that crazy stuff.
Well, they're going to limit him. The word on the street this past week was, well, listen, we can't let Crazy Joe out. So we're going to have to keep him to 5 minutes. And then he looks at his watch and says, I got to go. And he has to go because he called into Domino's, because he's known in Domino's. And now you can call ahead to Domino's, and it's sort of like the, Cheers. They know you in Domino's, welcome home, and they play that music, everyone's happy. Well, Joe's good with that. So he's going to do his thing for 5 minutes, run off, get a pizza at Domino's, and go to another one. That's how he'll do it and keep it close. But what happens when he really has to debate? I'll tell you something. It'll be intriguing to watch Bernie and Biden debate each other and see where that goes. That's going to, I want caramel popcorn for that, not just popcorn. I'm going to need a sugar high to keep myself cooking for that one.
Well, Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time. Great show. Great to see you. But don't worry, Rich, we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for all those very, very important jobs across America.